you have to find that ratio where some of your money is going toward investing, toward increasing your income, your value, your net worth by more than 2 or 3%, and potentially by way more than 2 to 3%.
Right, of course.
Because you don't want to just maintain. You want to get ahead. You want to be able to save and invest so that you're setting aside that nest egg so that when you do have to stop working or choose to stop working, you have the ability to do it and still not have to live in the poorhouse. Well, welcome to Getting Money Right, a show dedicated to helping you achieve financial freedom through education and inspiration so you can be free to pursue your true life's purpose. We are your hosts, Leo Sabo and David Thompson. On today's episode, we're continuing our conversation about economics and your personal finances. As a reminder, economics is the study of what constitutes rational human behavior in the endeavor to fulfill needs and wants given a world with scarce resources. And David, in the last episode, we quoted Ron Blue, who said that there are infinite amount of choices, but limited amount of resources.
Yeah, and we really emphasize the rational human behavior because what we're talking about is when it comes to our personal finances and really our lives, we don't always act rationally.
No, we don't.
And so it's important for us to realize these economic terms and understand just a basic understanding of some of these economic principles and understand the areas where we act rationally and the areas where we don't and how it affects our personal finances.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I love Ron Blue's quote, infinite choices with limited resources, right? You know, my paycheck is only so big, and there are so many more options out there I'd love to choose.
Yes.
So last episode, we talked about a couple different terms. One, the idea of something that's free. You know, what does that mean to say something's free? And we dug into the details on that. We talked about 0% interest and some of the advertising that you'll see around that. And then we talked about opportunity costs, and the opportunity to do one thing costs you the opportunity to do something else.
Yes.
And so in this episode, we're starting out with marginal utility. And again, we're just breaking down economic terms. So I love this, marginal utility. And the idea is that the utility, the use that you get when you use an object, the margin of value, the amount of value you get from each use, it changes. So maybe the first time you use something, it's great. The second time you use it, it's not as good. The third time you use it, it's not as good. Now, it still may be a good thing, but you don't get as much value. The margin of use, the marginal utility diminishes. So, think about it like this. If you live on $1,000 a month and somebody gives you $100, that is a massive impact on your finances. Like you're like, this feels really good, right? If you earn $100,000 a month and somebody gives you $100, it doesn't impact your life at all.
Not at all.
So if you have a lot more money, a little bit, the same amount of increase has a marginally less valuable factor in your life.
Right.
And so another great example, and this is just breaking it down super simple. I love chocolate chip cookies.
Who doesn't?
And so my mom made amazing chocolate chip cookies growing up. And so we would run around the house and usually steal some cookie dough before the cookies were done baking. And then we would dig into the cookies when they were done baking. And the first cookie comes out of the oven and it's warm and it's gooey and, it's melt in your mouth. You can taste the sugar, the butter, the chocolate chips. It's just perfect. And so you love it and you eat another one. And that one's really good. And so you eat another one. Well, now that you're on your third cookie, still phenomenal, but not quite as good as the first cookie, right?
Yep.
And so then you have a fourth and a fifth cookie. And by the time you get to the sixth cookie, you're thinking, okay, I'm probably done after 5. But let's say that your friend comes over, sees that you have cookies, and says, hey, let's sit down and have a few more cookies together. Well, now as you eat your 7th or your 8th cookie, every flavor that you loved originally, you loved the chocolate, you loved that butter, you loved the sugar, you could taste the sweetness. Now it returns zero value. The marginal utility, the use, the value of what you're getting from each consumption, each additional unit of consumption. I'm trying to throw some economics into this. It's this idea that the more you consume, the less value you get from each additional unit of consumption. And so those cookies are not as valuable on the 8th one as they are on the first one.
Yeah. Something that used to satisfy doesn't fulfill you the same way. I remember when we would go on vacation when I was younger and we would get to stop at McDonald's. It was such a big deal back then. and you'd be able to get a McDonald's sundae. But then Dairy Queen came along, and then you can have a Blizzard, and you can have other things. So there are so many choices, and it's easy to just up, up, up. But it's much harder to go the other way.
Right.
And I think that's the thing we need to be careful with, is that we can so easily embrace a higher level of lifestyle. It's easy to go up. It's so much harder to go down. So we have to be careful how quickly we rise up to a certain level of lifestyle.
Yeah.
Because pretty soon it's going to be very hard if we have to step the other way. So again, with this marginal utility, we have to be aware that more doesn't necessarily mean better and more fulfillment.
Right.
And we have to find that balance.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing that we want to get across in this is that, we all have a desire to grow and to learn and to increase our income and increase our finances. And there's good things in that. But if that is the end goal in and of itself, just realize that the more you consume, the more you add to your life over time, it's not going to return the same value.
Right.
And really, it leads some people to a state of depression because they realize that the thing that they've been chasing and trying to achieve their entire life, as they're getting there, they realize it's not adding the level of value they thought it would. And they realize they may have sacrificed a lot of really important things along the way. And by the time they get to that place, we're on the 8th cookie, and now they have 100 cookies, and they can eat as many cookies as they want all day long. They realize, you know what? I was happier when I just had 3 cookies and a glass of milk. And what did I sacrifice to get to 100 cookies when I was happy at 3? And your example of McDonald's, I mean, growing up, we never went out to eat. And so when we went to McDonald's, that was like, wow, I can't believe the family, we're going to go grab some McDonald's. It's going to be awesome. It was a huge value. But you're right. The more money you have, the more income, the more increase. Now, if we talk about going to McDonald's, it's like, well, are you trying to abuse us? It's like all of a sudden everybody in the family is like, well, I don't want to do that. I'd rather just have water at home. We've gotten to this place where it's like, okay, and this is not a McDonald's conversation. This is our desires have changed, our contentment has changed, and our gratitude has changed. And as you go through the process of your personal finances, be aware. Be aware when those shifts happen, and be aware of what you're chasing, and realizing that there is value to adding things into your life, but at some point it's not going to return the same marginal utility that it did on that first use.
So then the next term that we want to talk about, the next economic term, is inflation. When you think back on what you used to be able to buy for $1 and what you can get for $1 now, you're getting a glimpse of inflation. Inflation is the increase in the overall prices of products and services in our economy. Each dollar buys less, and we all probably start to feel poorer. A low, stable rate of inflation is normal, and economists consider it ideal, but high inflation can happen when the money supply expands too much and too quickly. So it's obviously not seen as a great thing by consumers who have to pay more for goods. And there are other negative effects, including less investments and savings, and possibly a shortage of goods if people start hoarding money.
So what we want to do there is give you an understanding of the way that economists describe inflation. Because when you hear that and you talk about it in the news and you see this language and this jargon, it can be a little overwhelming to even just listen through the description. But just think for a second. Think back even to the 1990s and what you could buy with $20 at the supermarket. And you could probably fill your grocery cart probably a quarter of the way or half full with $20 in the 90s. If you go to the grocery store today, you may get 4 or 5 items because over time things cost more. The gasoline, think of the pump. I remember, and I'm not that old, but I remember paying less than $1 a gallon. And now you're not going to find anything for less than $2. I'm trying to think, maybe it was like 50 cents a gallon. I remember going pretty far back, and just a gallon of gas was very inexpensive. And it's doubled and doubled again. And so just realize, some of the things you always hear your parents or your grandparents talking about spending a nickel on a candy bar, right? And now you can't get a candy bar for less than $1. What we're talking about is that over time, things are going to cost more. So if you had held on to that nickel thinking, hey, I can buy a candy bar in 1960, well, that nickel today won't even get you a gumball out of the gumball machine.
That's right.
That's 25 cents.
That's right.
So you've got to be aware that if you're holding on to your money and you're not spending your money, I'm not saying you should spend, but I'm saying that if you're holding on to it and not investing it, then over time, your dollar is going down in value. And you need to be aware of that. I do the illustration with stamps as well. Think back to the oldest stamp that you can remember. And how much did you pay for that? And I've talked to people that had 5-cent stamps, and I think our stamps are somewhere around 50 cents now, give or take.
Yep.
And so just be aware, the average inflation rate in the United States is somewhere between 2 to 3% a year, which is very low. It's actually, according to economists, it's very healthy to have a little bit of inflation because it causes the economy to grow. More people are getting jobs, they're spending more, and as they spend more, people are willing to increase the price. And as the price increases, more jobs are created, and all these good things happen with a little bit of inflation.
Right.
But you have to be aware that if you're holding on to a dollar, just a basic example, if you have $1,000 today, 5 years from now, it'll only be worth about $900. 10 years from now, it'll be worth about $800. Now, when I say worth, you'd still have $1,000, but what you can buy is less.
Right.
And so you do not want to just take your money and stick it into a mattress. You have to plug it into some kind of investment that's going to beat that 2 to 3% threshold and really hopefully get you 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% rate of return. So your money's growing and can continue to beat inflation.
Yeah, it's so true. And really, I think about when we first got on a budget, I remember our grocery bill, and this was a family of 4, was around $400. And then as our kids got to about teenage to early 20s, just before they got married, our budget was around $900 a month. So, it's been close to 20 years, I guess. It was somewhere around between 18 and 20 years. But it went from 400 to 900. It more than doubled. Yeah. So I remember my wife would come home from time to time. Natalie would come home and she would say, everything just went up. And really, she literally, because she did most of the grocery shopping, she would literally feel, and I know some of the women will connect with this, when you go to the grocery store and you see the same items you're buying week in and week out, and then you see something go up 20, 30 cents. But it's one item, it's 4 items, it's 10 items, and before you know it, it's an extra $20, $30. So if you're trying to spend $150 a week or $200 a week, all of a sudden it's $250, and it throws you off. So it's happening around us. I think that's what's important about this specific topic of inflation, is to realize that there's nothing we can do to stop it from happening, but how we react to these economic situations is something that we can do. So it's about being frugal. It's about understanding how to adjust with the inflation. And what David said is really important, is we cannot allow ourselves to fall behind, because really there's only 2 choices. We could either lower our lifestyle by 2 to 3% every year, which is unlikely that we'll do for a long, long time, right? Because if we lower 2 to 3% for the next 10 years, we're going to be living on 70% what we do today, which I'm sure most people will be like, I'm barely getting by today. Right. I can't see making it on 70%. So that's not really a way to go. The other way, though, is to find ways to make your money grow beyond that 2 to 3%, so that you're not just keeping up, but you're actually getting ahead. And how do we do that, David?
Yeah, well, so this is where I'd go back to episode 11, 12, 13, and 14 and learn about investing. Because if you don't have a baseline understanding of where to invest over a long period of time and why it's important to have your money in the market and maybe an appropriate mix of bonds and stocks and looking through mutual funds, if I say that and that doesn't make sense to you, you have to go back and listen to episode 11, 12, 13, and 14. We break it down very simply. And this is extremely important because if you're not earning that 2 to 3% a year, it's going to kill your lifestyle. Yeah. And you see this happen a lot. I think this is important even when you're walking with your parents or your grandparents, helping them understand that this 2 to 3% is happening every year to their money. If they're holding it in cash, this is where you see a lot of families, the parents and the grandparents come back and live at home with the next generation because they had to cut their lifestyle, and cutting their lifestyle meant they had to sell their home because they couldn't maintain the maintenance and the taxes and the insurance because they weren't anticipating this. So you want to make sure that your family members and your relatives are invested in something that's going to beat inflation over time. It's not just, can I get a good rate of return? If you're not getting any rate of return, you're going to get tackled from behind by inflation. It's going to pull you down. Yeah, so true. If your money's going toward depreciating assets instead of appreciating assets, over time you're going to get killed by inflation. I mean, think about if you're constantly borrowing for a car, right? If you're buying a car on payments,
By the time you pay off the car is worth less than half of what you paid for it, right? So the idea there is not that you should never borrow or only invest and not spend any money. Obviously, that's not a possibility, but you have to find that ratio where some of your money is going toward investing, toward increasing your income, your value, your net worth by more than 2 or 3%, and potentially by way more than 2 to 3%.
Right, of course.
Because you don't want to just maintain. You want to get ahead. You want to be able to save and invest so that you're setting aside that nest egg so that when you do have to stop working or choose to stop working, you have the ability to do it and still not have to live in a poorhouse.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about another interesting economic term, something that you've probably all heard in the news or on the radio or in the newspaper, and that is when a recession happens. So let's talk a little bit about recessions. So the economic definition is that a recession is a significant decline in economic activity that goes on for more than a few months. And it's visible across most of, if not all of the economy, the production, employment, whether people have jobs, the actual income that people are taking home. Sometimes people see that they're taking home less money because there's less work, there's less production, and just even the things that we buy and sell. Sometimes you'll see things go down in cost in a recession or stay the same. Back in 2009, when the Great Recession happened, you saw prices be stable for a couple of years. So there was no inflation because nobody could raise prices on anything because people could barely afford to pay what was already there. And so some companies even lowered their prices slightly, but most just stayed the same. So when we talk about economic activity, this is the activity across all of the economy, making products, selling products, buying goods and services. So, I mean, even just services, not even just physical products, but services. I go get my oil changed. Everything is impacted by this. Companies will make less, and so they'll lay off people. Now people don't have jobs, so now they're spending less. As they spend less, then the companies are earning less, so they lay off more people. And it becomes this really difficult cycle to break. And the important thing here, we don't have to get into all the details on recessions, but the important thing to realize here is that it's going to happen. At some point in time, we're going to experience another recession. They're not perfectly predictable, but they always come, in so many year increments. So it could be 7 years, and then it could be 10 years, and then it could be 13 years, and it could be 4 years. I mean, you don't know when the next one will happen, but it's going to happen. And so you need to be aware and you need to be ready for that. So Leo, what are some of the things that we do to prepare ourselves?
Well, we covered this in previous episodes, but what we talk about is the stability that you need to have in your income and being prepared for the ups and downs of like a recession. And it doesn't necessarily even have to go into a recession. We talked about savings, how important it is for someone to have an emergency fund because you just don't know what's going to happen. And then we talked about the difference between different households. You can have a 2-income household, 2 different people making decent money, working for 2 separate companies, and the possibility of both of them losing their income at the same time is fairly low, right? I mean, if they're working at 2 different companies and both of them have good jobs, that's less likely that's going to happen. So their savings may not be as high, their emergency savings, because if one of them loses their income, the other one will still have it. So they can cut back and they can still survive. They will need some savings, but not a tremendous amount. On the other hand, if you're self-employed or if you're on commission-based type of income or job that pays on sales job, then you would have to have at least 6 months worth of income set aside. One, because it's a cycle, right? I mean, there are heavy seasons for selling and buying, and there's seasons where it kind of goes down around the holidays, around winter. Certain businesses don't do as well as they do in the summer. So if you're in that position, then your emergency fund has to be way bigger than the other person that has a dual income family, because everything depends on you. When your income stops, everything stops, right? So how long is it going to take you to find another job, to get that sales routine back in place, to get the clients, to get the network started up so that you can have a steady income? It could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, it could be 8 months. And if you don't have 6 months to a year, and I personally prefer a year, if you don't have that in place, you're scrambling and you're going backwards and you're borrowing to get through. And so not only are you not surviving, you're going in the hole. And that's really what I want to warn our listeners is in recessions, people go into a lot of debt.
Right.
That's the downside that I think most people don't really recognize, is because not only are they not spending, they're not spending because they're being frugal. They're not spending because they don't have the money to do it. And then what happens is as goods and services and jobs go away, right? As people spend less money and jobs go away, now they don't have the ability to make their obligations, their credit card payments, their normal bills, all those things. So now they're starting to borrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the time this thing starts to pick up, the job comes back. Maybe it's not as good as the last one they had.
Yeah.
Maybe it's less pay. Now it's really hurting. And it's going to take them years to climb back out of that hole. And that's really, I think, what I want to emphasize the most is we need to be prepared for recessions. Like you said, we can't predict them. They will happen. But we need to be prepared for them, because if we are, the chances of us going in a hole is less likely. If we can just sustain during a recession and not take a step backwards, that's a win to me, right? Because recession, usually everybody has to tighten the belt and usually everybody's struggling. But if you could just maintain your level of lifestyle and not have to, go crazy in the hole, then you win.
Yeah.
Because then you catch the swing upwards, and now you just keep moving upward.
Yeah.
So you may pause, but you're not going to do a recess. You're not going to digress, or you're not going to go backwards.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think that's the biggest thing that you can prepare for, is just not to go down. And then when the cycle repeats, you just keep going up.
Yep. And that's the thing, is that, as the economy goes down and a recession occurs and it affects the whole country, well, over time, it's going to come back around, and the jobs are going to come back, and the income is going to come back, and the pay rates will go back up. And sometimes it takes longer than others. Sometimes it's pretty quick. So if you can just maintain, if you can have a safe, strong posture during the recession, then you're ready for that uptick to come, and then you can really benefit. So one thing I want to also warn you against is the fear of the recession, or the idea that the recession has to impact you personally, dramatically and deeply. A lot of people, it may happen across the entire country, and you may see a reduction in the labor force by 4%, 5%, even up to 10%. That's 10% of people. You can stay in the 90% of people that maintain your job.
Yep.
You can make sure that where you're at today, you have what I call career insurance, and you're a top performer. And so you're the last person the company's going to let go. And if the company goes under and everybody gets let go, then you're a top performer, and you know how to take those skills into another company. And so you need to start today building your network, focusing on your relationships in your industry, making sure that you're buying yourself a little bit of relational equity and insurance so that when something comes along, it doesn't hit you hard. Most of the people that I know, when a recession comes, and we live in Texas, and Texas usually doesn't get hit as hard by national recessions because we've got a great economy here, but it's affected. Most of the people that I know here in North Texas were not dramatically impacted by the recession.
Right.
There were some things, they weren't able to invest as much. They maybe had to pull back. They maybe had to sell a home and get a smaller home. There are some things, but at the same time, most of the people I know didn't feel it too heavily. And you can be in that percentage of people. You can be one of the people that is ready to move into another career, onto another job site, working for another employer. You can be ready to go with the skills you have, but you have to start planning that now. That's the emergency fund that Leo was talking about. It's having margin in the budget. So if you're constantly already living 10% below your income, 20% below your income, 30% below your income. Now, if you have to leave, if your job disappears and you have to take another job at 70% of the income for a year, for 2 years during the recession, you can do that. You can maintain your lifestyle, which was 70% of your original income. And then when the recession's over and incomes come back up, you're ready to jump back into a great position. The next thing that you want to do is, if you've been living well below your means for a while and you've been piling up some of that 10% or 20%, now you've got investment money. And this is what the people that have been in this game for a long time, handling wealth, handling money, they've done well over a long career, they actually look for the recessions as an opportunity.
That's
right?
when they make the most money.
That's when they make the most money, because people that were over leveraged and that weren't ready for it, they have to sell fast. And when you sell fast, you sell cheap.
That's right.
Or you go through a bankruptcy and the judge sells it for you. And when the judge sells it for you, they're not looking to make a profit. They're just looking to get rid of it, to be done with it. And so you're at this place where if you have money in the bank, you can take advantage of real estate opportunities, low cost in the stock market. I mean, really, stocks dip usually when the economy dips. And so you can buy companies much cheaper than you usually would. This is actually the best time to invest, But you can only invest if you've built that relational equity in your career, you've built that savings, you have your emergency fund, and you know that you're ready to just embrace this storm with no problem.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm going to focus on just one of those. Just I want to emphasize the importance of margin in a budget. That it's not just to attain a certain lifestyle and then maintain that and maybe have a little bit of wiggle room, maybe have your savings in place. Those things are great. But if you can get to a place where you increase the margin between what you need to live on and what you actually make, that's where that additional 20, 30, 40, 50% can then take you to become wealthy.
Yeah.
You can go from just getting by to having a comfortable retirement to actually becoming wealthy. And I see every single person, honestly, every person that I've studied that has become financially wealthy has taken that step where they have limited their lifestyle, right? They have lived on way less than what they're making. And like you said, David, they wait for the down cycle because they know when everybody's selling, I'm buying.
Right.
Because I'm getting bargain basement type prices.
Yeah.
And that's I mean, it's not rocket science. We all know it all makes sense to us, right?
Yeah.
And I remember in 2012 when we bought our investment property, the recession lasted for 2-3 years or so. I mean, even through 2012, 13, it was still, I mean, I remember people were still, there were still foreclosures. A bunch of houses were in foreclosure. So when we bought this property, it was undervalued.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 2.5 times what it was 6 years ago.
Wow.
Today.
Yeah.
But that's because somebody was desperate to sell.
Right. Right.
And the reason they were desperate to sell is because they were in debt and they needed the money.
Yeah.
And it was a great investment for me. It would have been for them, but they didn't have the margin.
Right.
And so, see, I took advantage because I was prepared to take an opportunity and buy something because I had margin. They didn't have margin. They had to sell.
Right.
And that's really, it's as simple as that. If you have margin, you have opportunities and you can advance, or you could take a step backwards.
Yeah.
It's really up to you. And what we're trying to impress on you, our listeners, is that recessions and ups and downs come. Layoffs will happen. I remember when I first started my job as an aircraft mechanic, they told me you're going to be laid off 2 to 3 times in your career.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't believe it, but I went through 2 layoffs and it happened. And the first time it devastated me. The second time, didn't even feel it.
Right. Wow. That's awesome.
Because I had margin.
You had the plan. Right.
The next time it happened, I had margin. We kept on trucking. So that's the really the difference between being prepared and not prepared is understanding that a recession will happen, and how we build margin is by doing the things that you talked about: having an emergency fund, a career insurance, margin in the budget, and investing.
Yeah.
Create margin so you can invest. That's the only way you're going to get out of the hole, and that's the only way you're going to really make some great progress.
Yeah. Well, and I remember you telling me that some of the people at one of the companies that you worked for, they lived their budget not just based on their annual income, but based on the fact that the company was supplying a lot of overtime.
Yes.
And so that overtime let them work extra and at a higher rate of pay.
Yes.
And so they were living based on the budget of every dollar that was coming in, and they were working a bunch of extra hours. Well, as soon as the recession came, the first thing that disappeared was the overtime.
That's right.
And so if you've been used to living on an extra $20,000, and that's a major lifestyle adjustment. And so that's the thing. I mean, begin to learn to live on what your annual income is, and then over time, treat it like, that's a bonus. That's savings. That goes into savings. It reduces debt, and it becomes a rainy day fund for the next recession. So I can go out and buy a piece of property that will go up 2.5 times in value in the next so many years. I'm looking at the S&P 500 right now, and if you had bought just one mutual fund, an index fund of the S&P 500 when it was at 690, when it was rated at 690 back in 2009. That was when it was at its lowest, right around 690. Well, now it's at over 2,400. That means it doubled from 690 to 1,200 and something, maybe 1,380, and then it doubled again to 2,600, and it actually got up to 2,900. But it doubled and it doubled again. So if you were ready to take advantage of that recession, if you had some money saved, then in 10 years you would double your money and double it again. Now, here's what's interesting. We're right at the place where, it peaked around 2,900 and now it's dropped down to 2,600. And everybody's freaking out because that's a 300-point change. Yeah. And that's about 10%. And it's like, oh no, the world's coming to an end. Like, I hate my investments. Yep. Well, if you had started at 600, the fact that it's down at 2,600 would not be a problem. You're like, oh, okay, no worries.
Yeah.
And if you buy
I can weigh this out.
I can weigh this out. Right. Exactly. And if you buy every year in the good years and the bad years, you're buying it when it's cheap, you're buying it when it's expensive. And over time, you're going to average a really good rate of return if you have a well-diversified, portfolio. And that's such a jargon way to say it. I guess my pitch there is go back and listen to episode 11, 12, and 13 and 14 and really dig into investing and be ready for that. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this episode as we dug into a little bit more of the economy and how it impacts your personal finances, marginal utility, inflation, dealing with recessions. This is stuff I geek out over, and I hope you're enjoying it. I would ask that you would take some time to go and rate, review, and subscribe to our channel.
Yes.
It might not seem like a big deal to you, but if you click the subscribe button, that triggers something in the algorithm for whatever engine you're using to listen to it, whether it's iTunes or Android, or even if you're just listening off of Leo's webpage. It will trigger something in the algorithm that will help other people find it. So subscribing helps other people find it. If you will rate it 5 stars, iTunes, it's 5 stars, and maybe put a nice little comment with a few good words. Or Castbox is, if you have an Android, it won't let you rate it in a scale of 1 to 5, but it will let you add a comment in the comment box. Please go and add a comment. That's social proof to other people that this is a great show that will improve your life. And if you've enjoyed it, we're asking you to go on there and share that with other people.
That's right. I mean, if you enjoyed it, just think of someone else that also could enjoy it. That's what we're trying to do, is serve more people. And the marketing side is we're hoping that some of you will just promote that.
Yes.
If you're enjoying it and getting value out of it, share it with somebody you love, somebody that could benefit.
Yeah. Leo and I love doing this, but we also take time out of our day to come do this.
Yep.
And so we would be honored and rewarded if you would do that for us. Can you share this on your favorite social media platform? Just take the link directly off. There's usually a share button. Share that link on Facebook, on Instagram, wherever you can, or just put it into a text message. Look at the last 5 people that you've texted and just say, hey, I just listened to this great episode of Getting Money Right. I want to support a friend. Will you listen to it? Will you download this episode? Would you take a minute and give it 5 stars just based on our friendship? Use your relational equity to help Leo and I out. We would love that. And you can find the show notes to this episode and more, plus a bunch of content and resources at leosabo.com. Spend some time on there, read through some of the blogs, and then share those blogs. And overall, we look forward to having you join us next time so that together we can keep getting money right. Not want to just take your money and stick it into a mattress. You have to plug it into some kind of investment that's going to beat that 2 to 3% threshold and really hopefully get you 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% rate of return, so your money's growing and can continue to beat inflation.